This one will be about the impact measurement. And today we have two very different, but also the same. Like they work in the same field, but they have very different background. One is Steven. He's like kind of from the traditional, more of a traditional impact measurement, or at least Web 2 impact measurement scene. And Carl Hill is from the open source or Web3 impact measurement. So comparing these two different experiences, I think we can actually get to a really interesting conclusion on how each of them can learn from each other. First, I would like to introduce them and welcome them to also introduce yourself. Stephen, would you like to go first and how you're related to impact measurement and who are you?
Good afternoon, everybody. Yeah, I hope traditional does not mean I'm old.
You're not.
Okay, I'm Stephen Yang, founder of Canopy Impact Investment, and we focus on social business and B Corp as our investment targets. And we also believe maybe in the future, when the mainstream business become more serious about sustainability transformation, then we might start to look for such targets. Okay, and when we are doing impact investment, we have to deal with how we measure those social impact. So it become our daily work to do the investment evaluation so that we can evaluate their social impact or intangible value to set up the investment terms. Okay. We also provide consultant services for such thing as transformation of sustainability. And one line of our service is about helping company to do the annual sustainability report. We use the approach of SROI, social return on investment assessment, as the basis. But we skip the difficult part, which is monetization modeling. So people can do the annual report and still, maintain the tracing of their stakeholders' impacts. And that's what we do.
I think what Stephen mentioned here is really important to fund in the comments, since we have funding in our name, and actually having a few funders here to share how they actually evaluate different projects is very important for all of the open source projects that are looking for funding. Like how exactly are the investors thinking about impact when it comes to like measurement and like how valuable your project is. Carl, do you want to introduce yourself a bit?
Sure. Well, first off, thank you so much to Noah and to Vivian and the Funding the Commons organizers here. This has been like the event that I've been looking forward to all year. And so I'm really, really happy to be here. One thing I'll add to the introduction that Vivian gave is I also have a background in traditional impact measurement. So for the first part of my career, I did work in like microfinance, international development, helping companies with sustainability compliance and ESG reporting. So I've been able to see a lot about how that world works. And then it was through that lens that I started viewing some of the innovations that were happening on crypto networks and in funding open source and digital public goods that said, this is like really fascinating. And I saw an opportunity to hopefully help some of these networks speed run a lot of the lessons that have been learned, the way that public goods were traditionally funded and how impact measurement was traditionally done. Over the last year or so, I worked with Protocol Labs on the HyperCerts team. More recently, I've spun up something new with Ray, who's somewhere in the crowd here. We both work together at Protocol Labs called Open Source Observer. We have a company we've set up called Kariba, which we're doing that work under. And the goal really is to get really good at measuring the impact of open source software. Because if we can do that, then network funders, ecosystem funds, foundations, they can deploy capital much more effectively towards driving open source impact. And I'll give some examples of that in a little bit. But again, thank you so much for being here.
I think one of my first questions would be for Carl. Like, it's very interesting for you to see someone like actually jumping from the traditional impact scene to the Web3 one. What is the connection there, and what really speaks to you that makes you want to learn about Web3 and its impact?
So there's a couple things. The first one is that having done work previously where you would need to go and interview people, you would need to go onto farms and do surveys and gather data, like record keeping and writing that up and scanning it and so on. I've seen how difficult it is to get good representative data to measure impact. And so one of the great benefits of working with digital public goods is that most of the work, most of the artifacts that are being produced are digitally native. And so you can skip that step of needing to digitize what the work is, which is a real advantage. If you want to be able to get better at measuring impact, being able to start with relatively clean, easier to work with data is a big advantage. My hope, of course, is that we can learn things that are useful for measuring the impact of digital public goods and then extend that to the rest of the world. I don't think it stops just at getting really good at measuring open source software impact. I think the goal would be to develop some new tools and some approaches that can then transform the way public goods are funded everywhere.
So what you're saying is basically to find an entry point to eventually evaluate all impact that people are doing. But open source is only one of the angle, right? And you choose open source, and Web3 is kind of open source itself. So it's kind of a really good entry point. I want to come back to Steven to talk a little bit about like the traditional method. Like you mentioned SROI. What have you been doing with SROI? How do you like really measure impact? Can you walk us through the process a little bit, and also tell us like what is the biggest challenge of measuring real world impact?
Okay, when we do the impact investment, we pay attention to many aspects. For example, any action plan could influence the target stakeholders. For example, disabled and their family. But not only specific individual or organization, but also the non-specific or general impact or outcome. For example, our action might raise the social awareness. It's in general. It's not for specific person or organization. And awareness can be measured. And we also pay attention to the action taker side, because action taker might become more experienced, more skilled, and their service might turn from piecemeal to more systematic service system, right? And all this progress can be measured. Okay, let me see what I missed. Okay, so canopy impact investment actually maintain all kinds of impact or intangible value can be measured. That means once they can be measured, they can also be managed. And that's our belief.
Like for me, I've been through this like impact measurement process for some like really social project. It's relatively not environmental, because within ESG, like environmental is relatively the one that's like easier to measure. Just like carbon credit, there's different system around it. But for social, like how people interact with each other, and Stephen mentioned action taker. Each individual within the ecosystem are stakeholders, and how you actually consider all these stakeholders within your measurement would be the key. Well, what is the like challenge there for engaging these people, and is it stopping people from measuring the impact because it's relatively subjective?
Okay, for both the user part and the action taker parts, we face all kinds of issues. For example, for the action targets, many people they seem to, believe there must be some kind of value that they cannot measure at all. So they actually didn't take any action about how to measure those possible outcomes and try to manage it. And that's about the awareness, right? And even when they be aware of the possibility, now we will encounter the readiness of their information system, because they need to start from zero to start build up the system so they can start to collect the relevant data or information. And also for the action taker side, one issue is about the quantitative approach. If it comes to specific quantitative goal like monetization or the intangibles, it becomes, technically the threshold of the technical threshold become quite high. Okay, so that's one reason you heard of annual sustainability report, annual CSR report, annual ESG report, but you never heard of any SROI annual report, right? And there's also one issues about since I don't remember last time I speak English in public meetings, so
You're
I
doing really
prepare
good.
for some talking points. So let me check if I missed some point I want to make. Okay, another challenge is about, because this market is still not big enough or profitable enough to attract enough resources and talents. Okay, so for service providers, okay, it's not many. It's not. I would say the capability and the capacity still need time to build.
What I hear that's really key is to start with at least something. Even though measuring impact can be very subjective, it can be from your own perspective, like a few perspectives. It can be really singular, but at least it's starting to measure impact instead of just like leaving it there and don't believe that you can actually create some system around it. So that's a really important mindset, I think, around it. That's for the like physical world. I would like to jump into the digital world a little bit. Carl, can you tell us what exactly is digital public goods so that we can start diving into like measuring them?
Sure. So digital public goods, that includes everything from open source software, protocols, programming languages, open data sets, public blockchains, digital commons, place where we go and chat and share information. I think increasingly as the boundaries between our physical life and our digital life get more and more blurry, we're going to see that there's many more of these spaces that are creating a lot of value for society, but don't have good governance built in. And so part of the problem that we need to solve is not only how do we fund these digital public goods, but also how do we effectively govern and decide who has a say and who is able to effectively allocate resources, determine what things are needed for these digital public goods and commons to flourish.
We learned about how like physical impact is measured. Like what does open source like Observer does like that help with that process for digital public goods?
So one of the things which is really powerful about crypto networks and Web3 is that you get both a social network and a set of financial rails out of the box effectively. So you can see how money is flowing, who's contributing what, where it's coming from, and you can start to construct these graphs. Now in the real world, doing that stuff, it's possible, but it's very difficult and it's often very localized. The real power that you have with digital public goods is that it's a lot easier to start observing some of these patterns and identifying, layering data sets on top of each other. So specifically what we're trying to do is take kind of the financial layer, so looking at public goods, which are receiving funding from different Ethereum-based grant ecosystems, and then adding in the layer of what kind of open source activity do they have. So looking at code contributions, looking at GitHub repos, looking at contributors. And then in addition to that, we're also trying to layer in the role the different kind of packages play, because you have software which often relies on different dependencies. And so you can actually build out a graph of how different software packages relate to each other. So just right now with those 3 data sets, there's a lot of really interesting things that you can learn. You can see, for instance, you can see a library that is being used by lots of applications, and those applications are generating sequencer fees on a blockchain. And then that blockchain might want to take some of those sequencer fees and turn that into grants that fund the libraries. And so through these types of things, you're able to build these really interesting regenerative financing systems, and all the data to measure who's doing what and where it's coming from is visible. So instead of me needing to go and interview lots of people or build out a proprietary data set, I can just start looking and start going where the data is and trying to surface insight, which I think is a really, really powerful ability. Because if you can do that, you start to go beyond just looking at each individual contribution or each project and say, how is this entire ecosystem doing? How is this network of all of these different projects and contributors, how healthy is it? And what types of contributions or what types of investments are leading to more growth or more positive outcomes for that community?
Got it. So now we got the high level. It's basically so for open source software, there's already some data available that people can that you guys can already use to measure the impact. I kind of want to ask you, both of you, to give us an example of how you guys measure impact for one really specific example. What is the process and how did you approach it? Let's start with Carl.
Sure. So one of the big things that we're trying to work on right now is this indicator called downstream impact. So basically, you have something which is very visible on a blockchain, which is how many users are here and how much fees are they generating for the network. So anybody can go, anybody can quickly observe that kind of activity. The more interesting question is say, okay, what are the different tools upstream of that impact that those applications are using that enable them to deploy more quickly or provide security or provide other services that are necessary? And so what we're trying to do is trace upstream of that application layer what other things are happening and determine a way of measuring their respective contributions towards that downstream activity. Because if you can do that, then you could have someone who is creating a software package, has no revenue models, not charging users anything, but everybody downstream of that who is using it and generating fees or extracting revenue, you can see their contribution, and then you can actually fund that upstream. So that's, again, the indicator is downstream impact, and we believe that that is a way of actually trying to take funding which comes from end users and recycle that, recirculate it back to some of the contributions that happened upstream of them.
So basically saying there's a lot of funding that is actually allocating to the application layer, but not very much to the fundamental building blocks of each application. And with tracing it upstream, you can actually do that with a more traceable manner, having everything on chain. Yeah. Got it. And what about Stephen?
Okay.
For
this year, we are doing a project about the social housing, the impact of social housing in Taichung City. And when we are measuring the residents, not only the financial benefits from living in that housing, but also sentimental values, interpersonal benefits, or community recognition, or knowledge ability, right? All these kind of intangible values is the most important, it's the most difficult issues. We have to deal with the data accessibility, data availability. So one important approach is to do the stakeholder survey. We cannot rely only on, let's say, digital tools. We have to directly get the data from those stakeholders. Maybe one stakeholder, you can say it's subjective. But how about all the stakeholders' subjective evaluation? It becomes relatively objective. So you can gather the data. So I think that's why for SROI, social return on investment approach, their first principle is always get stakeholder involved. That's very important approach for us to address those data accessibility and data availability issues. Okay.
I think it's really interesting that Stephen here is pointing out how collectively with different like singular perspective, things and action become like plural. It's like different voices, different perspective, and everyone contributing their own view and aggregating everything and make it the way that you measure the impact. I wonder how like Carl think eventually the approach we are having for the like digital public goods or open source impact measurement can like assist with these kind of measurement in the real world, since initially you were actually from this side, right? And you jump into Web3 because it's like kind of an entry point for measurement. So what do you think is the tipping point of like actually having these tools like helping the real world?
Yeah, I mean, the challenge with impact is that it's very subjective, right? And so something could exist and it could impact me in a different way than it would impact Stephen or would impact you. And at the same time, your relationship with that impact can change over time based on your context or how much experience you have. So I think one of the mistakes that we've made is trying to search for some kind of a magic indicator which solves all your problems. And you can say, everybody needs to be optimizing for this one thing because that is the ultimate indicator. I think it's worth looking, but I don't think we're probably going to find something like that. I think much more of it is going to require giving different types of communities and different types of users the ability to sense make and to surface or upvote things that are more important to them. It's very much a collective intelligence problem, and we should be embracing the fact that the more people bringing their views and their different ways of making sense of this and determining what is impactful to them is going to give us a richer understanding of what things are useful and what things are most impactful. In my former life, one of the things that I used to do was actually help companies measure their progress against sustainable development goals. So you could have something like child labor or deforestation. And the problem with these indicators is they're very black and white. There's like a definition that's been created in Geneva or somewhere which says, here's what child labor is, or here's what deforestation is. And there's an expectation that the farmer or the family that is being measured against that standard has the same understanding and the same kind of ideology behind it. And in most cases, the people who are being measured have no idea where those standards came from. They have no knowledge of what that actually means and why that is viewed as a good or a bad thing. And so, again, in the traditional world that I worked in, I feel we constructed a very unfair system where people were being measured against a standard that they had no autonomy over, and they had no input, and in many cases had no understanding of why that was an important thing for them to be trying to improve or upgrade against. So I think that ideally what I'd like to see is much more bottom-up standard and sense-making, communities figuring out what matters most to them and being able to upvote that or surface that to influence where funding comes from and what things we're able to produce more of.
So what, someone is clapping, someone is applauding that. Yeah, so what Web3 the decentralized network can bring to this, this whole discussion is actually around how you can build up that relational layer of measuring impact, like bringing people in instead of like having one centralized authority telling you what the standard is and everyone just like blindly believe in the system that's set. And Stephen, I wonder like what do you think is like this kind of decentralized networks value to the network or the impact work that you've been doing for measurement, for any kind of like blockchain, any kind of this decentralized network, like what is the value?
Okay. Probably there are two kind of approach. One is top-down, the other is bottom-up. Top-down has been accumulating lots of domain knowledge already. So we don't have to start from zero. Okay, so if we want to make a more comprehensive or more healthy framework for bottom-up approach, I think actually we can leverage the previous accumulation of knowledge and the wisdom. Okay, so for example, when I'm talking about collecting data, first, how do you know what kind of data is relevant or useful? You need to have some knowledge base, right? Okay, so for the development of a decentralized framework, I think it's also very, very effective and very resourceful and very convenient in the future. I believe so. I sincerely believe so, but it takes time. But now, different part of this action taker, they don't really got a continual opportunity to kind of do the interdisciplinary communication and the dialogue, right? So maybe this is why Vivian invited me as a panelist to talk with Carl, okay? So I would say all kinds of approach. I welcome all kinds of approach. The most important thing is how can you get reliable and useful data? That's the most important things. And data source can be from all kinds of source. Okay, so of course it takes time. Yeah.
I guess like one of my takeaways will be like interdisciplinary will be super important for, it's like kind of the building blocks of bottom up, because you want bottom up, you want collective wisdom on a thing, and at the same time, as opposed to like one authoritarian like data set or a standard that's like against it. That would be something that I think a decentralized system can actually help build forward. Anything you guys want to add, like what you learned, or just like last word before we finish this panel, because it's like time is up.
Nothing else to add. If there are any questions, we can take some questions. Most excited about?
So Hall can ask, what are you guys most about impact measurement in general? What are you most excited about?
Okay.
Are you excited? Are you excited?
Yeah, I would say everybody might, for those who want to make changes, they all have their own theory of change. If you don't have data to feedback, you never know what you do is right or wrong. You need something to make you make adjustment, right? So you need data to verify what you do is wrong or right, or what kind of change you should make. And that made me excited, because that actually make me improve and grow as a change maker, right?
The improvement.
Yeah.
Growth.
Yeah. And also, there's an issue often being raised is about, this quantitative approach is not, cannot solve all the problems. Sometimes you have to rely on qualitative approach. But I would say both quantitative and the qualitative approach actually is to provide different set of data. It's all about different data, right? But for specific purpose, some data could be useful and relevant, some are not. So it depends on what kind of purpose you want to, realize.
Learn about the data, learning about everything, and using the data to improve your own theory of change, and that improvement and learning about everything basically excites you. Carl?
Sure, I'll take the question. So I'm excited about public goods funding. I think that in general, there's a perception among younger people that public sector work, government funding, things like that are really boring. And a lot of young people say the last thing I would ever want to do is go work on something in the public sector or funding public goods, right? And I think this community in particular has done such an amazing job of changing that perception and making it so that many young people today, and I meet all of them all the time, like I'm one of the old guys, right? But like I go to events and I see all of these new people that are coming in and saying, yeah, like I care about governance, I care about bottom-up data collection, I care about digital autonomy, I want to support these things, I want to fund them, and I want to get vocal about expressing the types of things, the types of public goods that I care about, and that's like part of your identity. So I think it's really, really exciting now that this whole new generation is getting excited about governance, excited about trying to fund things that matter to their communities, and they now have all sorts of new tools to do that in a completely different way. So I'm really excited about that.
That's a good ending.
I want to add
Add one thing. That's not the ending.
I know. Actually, I forgot what I
Oh,
wanted.
he forgot. That's even.
Okay. Yeah, now I remember. Okay. I maintain here all kind of intangible data can be measured to some degree. If you don't believe what I say is true, just go refund your ticket today. Oh, no, I'm just kidding. Just come to me, and I will try to, prove it to you.
Yes. I think we had a really good panel today. Thank you all for joining us today. And thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Carl. It was really amazing to talk to you. I look forward to talking to you more. Okay, great. Thank you.